If you are inside your home with the lights out, do not look outside your window. Turn on your lights before you look through any window. Do not leave your home if you see a figure outside. Even if he is turned away, do not look at him. Lock all doors and windows before turning off all lights inside your residence. Hide in a small space and call authorities. Do not move from hiding unless you hear an unfamiliar voice. If you do hear a familiar voice coming from inside your home, do not move. He is inside. He is inside. He is inside.
You'll never
Worst serial killers in history. PT1. Leonarda Cianciulli, born in Montella in 1894. She went down in history as the soapmate of Correggio because she killed a woman whom she later dissolved in caustic soda and turned them into bars of soap, which she sold to relative friends.
In 1979, a teenage girl accepts a babysitting job at an isolated home in the Minnesota woods. After putting the children to bed, she settles on the couch to watch TV, only to be startled by a phone call. She picks it up and hears heavy breathing, when suddenly a man's unsettling voice asks, "Have you checked on the children?" Nervous, she dismisses it as a prank and hangs up. 15 minutes later, the phone rings again. This time the voice asks, "Why haven't you checked on the children?" Panic sets in and she calls 911. The operator advises her to keep the caller on the line if they call back, allowing the call to be traced. Moments later, the phone rings again, and the voice snarls, "Check on the children now." Trembling, she keeps the call connected as instructed. Once more the phone rings. The operator's voice crackles through, urgent and frantic. "Get out of the house. The calls are coming from upstairs." Terrified but worried about the children, she hesitates before fleeing outside. She bolted out of the house, her heart pounding in her chest. There, a tall man stepped out of the shadows, his presence looming as he stared her down with a chilling intensity, and he asked in a cold, menacing voice, "Why didn't you check on the children?"
Ed Kemper seemed like an ordinary man, but beneath the surface lurked one of the most terrifying criminals of the 1970s. Known as the co-ed killer, Kemper took the lives of 10 people, including his own grandparents and 6 young women. At just 15, he shocked everyone by killing his grandparents. But after being released years later, his crimes grew even more sinister. Kemper preyed on female college students, offering them rides only to take them to a horrifying fate. What made Kemper even more disturbing was his intelligence and charm. He often hung out with police officers, gaining their trust, all while committing his heinous crimes. When he finally confessed, his calm and detailed account of the murders left everyone stunned. This is a chilling reminder that evil doesn't always wear a mask. Ed Kemper's story remains one of the most disturbing in true crime history, leaving a legacy of fear and questions about the human mind. Stay aware and stay safe. This ice cream shop owner's secret ingredient was truly disturbing. Buddy Sweet was the owner of a very successful ice cream shop called the Sugar Rush in Miami. During the 1980s, he was a local celebrity in the area, even appearing in a Bee Gees music video. Everyone loved him, and his famous saying, which was "My milkshake brings all the boys to the yard." For some reason, there was just something about his ice cream that would always leave you wanting more. Many of his customers would come by several times a day, every single day. When people would ask why his ice cream was so good, he would always say, "It's my secret ingredient." One day, a local food inspector would come into the shop in disguise and order just a basic ice cream cone for a reasonable price of $69. He really enjoyed the ice cream, but didn't understand the hype surrounding it. The inspector would go home that night and go to bed, but would quickly be awoken by a severe craving of ice cream. The craving was so bad that he drove to the ice cream shop at 3 in the morning. Even though they were closed when he arrived at the Sugar Rush, he would quickly see the ice cream shop owner in the back alley of the shop next to the dumpster with a suspicious man. At this point, the food inspector was undetected by the 2 men until his tummy started gurgling, causing Buddy Sweet and the suspicious man to stare directly at him.
In 1996, a young mother, Rachel Timmerman, accepted a ride home from a man she had recently met. But when they reached her house, he didn't stop. Instead, He ordered his nephew and friend out before speeding off to an isolated road where he assaulted Rachel. Desperate to escape, she pretended to enjoy it and convinced him to return to her house, where she quickly locked him out. Enraged, he pounded on the door, threatening to harm her daughter if she told anyone. When Rachel pressed charges, the man, Marvin Gabriel, retaliated by accusing her of drug use while on probation. She was sentenced to 5 months in jail. 9 days later, Marvin was arrested for the attack on Rachel, but the terror wasn't over. Upon her release, a persistent caller from the restaurant where she worked kept asking her on a date. She initially declined, but eventually agreed. The man insisted she bring her baby, saying he loved children. Rachel left home excited, hopeful for a fresh start, but she never returned. Days later, her father received a letter in her handwriting. The date went so well, we decided to get married and move to Arkansas. He was suspicious, but wanted to believe it was real. Until 2 fishermen made a grim discovery: Rachel's body, bound in chains and weighed down with cinder blocks at the bottom of Oxford Lake. Her daughter, Shannon, was never found. Unbeknownst to Rachel, the man who she went out on a date with was working for Marvin. It was his plan all along to unalive her and her daughter. Later, Marvin Gabriel was arrested and was sentenced to death.
Sometimes true for stranger than fiction. The case of Richard Trenton Chase is a story which even the most depraved horror writer would struggle to create. Over the course of 4 weeks spanning across 1977 and 1978, Richard Chase took the lives of 6 innocent victims in Sacramento, California. His murders gradually progressed in violence, beginning with drive-by shootings and culminating in acts of cannibalism.
Believe this tragedy is the result of something paranormal or something normal and rational and explainable. No matter which way you feel, or maybe somewhere in the middle, the details of the story itself, the actual facts of the story, are horrifying. What actually happened to this poor family in the 1920s it's just one of the more terrifying ordeals that I've ever come across, and it's crazy to me that it's a true story. Without giving too much away, someone or something shows up on this farm and it doesn't leave. One of the maids starts hearing strange sounds. They start looking for this person or this thing. They start seeing things moving around in their house, and there's every indication that someone is in the farm. Someone has snuck into the farm and is terrorizing us. And then on March 31st, 1922, whatever it was, finally attacks. This is the story of the Hinterkaifeck murder.
In 2013, a single mother began using a sleep tracking app to monitor her nights. But when she checked her recordings one morning, she found something deeply unsettling. The recording began with a series of faint clicking sounds, barely noticeable at first, but gradually growing louder. Then, clear as day, her own voice could be heard asking, "What are you doing?" Immediately after, a deep, unfamiliar voice responded, "Nothing." The clicking almost sounded like someone going through her personal belongings, and at the very end of the recording, the same voice muttered something like, "That's them." She had no memory of waking up that night. The only logical explanation was that she had somehow answered herself while sleep-talking, but the voice didn't sound like hers, not even close. It wasn't something she could have imitated, and it certainly wasn't her young child. As for the clicking sounds, their origin remained a mystery. She always kept a fan running for white noise, but these clicks seemed to come from right next to her phone, which rested on the bedside table.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
We were surprised to get a call back later that day to have us come in for questioning about something. Turned out, the tent we saw belonged to a missing person that had been gone for over a month. They searched the area, but found nothing else. They showed us pictures of the missing person, and both Matt and I were sure it wasn't the person we saw, which is extremely disturbing. Likely that person had something to do with the disappearance of the other person, and had Matt not woken up and scared them off, I probably would have been missing too. This was only a month ago. It was late September, and where I'm at, we were having a lot of rain. Pretty much every day, it was pouring down. I work as an outdoor security guard for a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, so rain doesn't exactly make my job any more enjoyable. Luckily, the company I work for lets me stay inside on rainy nights, but it always made the shift go by a lot slower. Instead of getting to roam around outside the building, I just had to stand by the glass entrance doors and watch for anything. Anyway, this night I got in at 9, locking up the place after all the employees left. It was pouring outside, so I stayed in and stood by the door, and honestly just tried to stay awake. There was nothing to see except rain and the occasional thunder and lightning.
Tutorial. Hello.
This was the real-life Homer Simpson, and it's quite disturbing. In 1969, before The Simpsons premiered, something strange happened in a small town in Oregon. A power plant worker named Hugh Jass disappeared without a trace. His co-workers described him as a heavy-set, balding man who was obsessed with donuts and worked in nuclear safety. But here's where it gets disturbing. On Hugh's last day at work, he reported a serious safety violation, something about glowing green waste being dumped illegally. The next day, his desk was cleaned out and his house was empty. When investigators looked into his employment records, they found nothing. It was like he never existed. In 1987, a retired security guard from the power plant finally revealed the truth. The plant owner, named Warren Peace, had been dumping radioactive waste into the local water supply for years. Hugh discovered the truth and threatened to expose everything. The night Hugh disappeared, security cameras caught him being led to Warren's office, but he never came out. 3 years later, his wife, Amanda Hugg, wrote an article about how sweet Hugh was, and she later sued the nuclear company for approximately $69 million. However, the court only granted her $6.02.
In 1995, 14-year-old John Hran was camping with his friend Christian by a quiet lake. The night turned tragic when a group of teenagers approached, blasting offensive music from a stereo. One boy threw a beer can in John's face, demanding he say, "I love racism." After he refused to say it, they became enraged. The group brutally attacked him, punching and kicking him as they laughed. They threw beer cans at his head, burned him with a flaming stick, and destroyed his belongings, even setting fire to the tent he shared with Christian. Throughout the night, the group taunted him, pretending to apologize and offering beer, only to hurt him again. Eventually, they pushed him into the lake. Desperate, he tried to swim away, but 2 attackers circled to the other side to block his escape. They threatened to harm Christian if John didn't return, forcing him to swim back to protect his friend. Once back on shore, the group resumed their assault, hitting him until he lost consciousness. Finally, they rolled him into the lake, where he tragically drowned. Daniel Hansen, Mikael Fjellholm, and 2 other attackers, whose names were withheld due to privacy laws, were all sentenced to several years in prison for their horrific crime.
This toddler called 911, but when the cops arrive, you won't believe what they see. This 911 operator got an unexpected call today. She heard a heartbreaking voice. It was a toddler asking to see his mom. The operator was immediately put on alert. "Can you hear me?" But all she heard was a baby's voice. She couldn't understand it. Over the phone, she heard dogs howling and barking. The hairs on the back of the operator's neck stood up. When she asked if the child had a parent with her, the toddler whispered, "No." The operator couldn't understand what the child was saying. This worried her. But then she heard a rustling on the phone. She and her team frantically tried to keep the toddler on the line long enough so they could triangulate her location. Suddenly, the call ended. Luckily, she got the kid's location in time. She sent a couple of deputies to check it out. When the deputies arrived at the little trailer home, what they found was much worse than expected. The cabin was very dirty and disorganized. There were feral dogs everywhere. The cops still didn't know where the kids were. The cops heard screams and broke down the door. You won't believe what they found in Seed. Click on the plus sign for part 2.
Eu às vezes não sei onde é que eu me meto quando eu vou escolher um filme para assistir. Oi, meu nome é Júlio e aqui no TikTok eu gosto de falar sobre filmes, séries e livros de terror, e se você curte essa vibe, já me segue aqui. Essa semana eu assisti esse filme aqui, VHS, que tá disponível no Prime Video, se não me engano, e tá como o nome de As Crônicas do Medo. Sério, minha gente, faz um tempinho que eu não assisti um filme que me deixou com tanto medo e agoniado como esse. E antes que alguém venha falar que eu sou muito emocionado, ou muito medroso, ou que eu tô exagerando, cada um sente medo de uma coisa diferente. Então, meu medo pode ser diferente do seu, e se você não sentiu medo desse, por favor, me indica aqui um filme que você sentiu muito medo, por favor. Tá, mas qual que é a premissa do filme? Um bando de arruaceiro é contratado para resgatar uma fita rara VHS aí na casa aí, numa casa bem estranha. E enquanto esse pessoal tá procurando por essa tal fita, né, algumas pessoas vão colocando outras fitas que tem lá para assistir e em cada fita dessa tem um filminho de terror, assim, um filminho bem perturbador. Só que o pequeno detalhe é que todo o filme é gravado estilo found footage. Isso mesmo, é aquele filme gravado estilo câmera que já dá uma agonia por natureza. O tanto de jumpscare que teve nesse filme, é sério. Eu fiquei sem ar. E eu tô vindo compartilhar aqui com vocês porque toda vez que eu compartilho um filme desses que eu fico meio que passando mal, as pessoas curtem. Então, se você gosta desse tipo de filme, de passar mal, assiste. Assiste e depois me conta.
In the heart of Dublin, there's a hospital with a story that chills to the bone. This is St. James Hospital, a place of healing, yes, but also a place where the past refuses to stay buried. They say that in the old operating theater, a ghostly surgeon still walks the halls, a man who dedicated his life to saving others, but whose own death remains a mystery. Surgeons who've worked here tell stories of tools moving on their own, of shadowy figures seen in the corner of their eyes, and of a man in a blood-stained coat standing silently in the doorway. They call him the ghostly surgeon. Some say he's still trying to save lives. Others say he's searching for something or someone he lost long ago. Those who've seen him say his presence is overwhelming. A cold chill fills the air, and then, just as quickly as he appears, he's gone. The ghostly surgeon of St. James Hospital, a reminder that even in a place of healing, the past never truly dies.
In 2021, a single mother woke at 3 a.m. to find a masked man standing silently in her bedroom doorway. For a few tense seconds, he just stared before suddenly rushing at her. He jumped on top of her, launching a vicious attack. Despite her desperate attempts to fight him off, she couldn't overpower him and began screaming for help. In a gruff, Batman-like voice, the intruder snarled, "You're going to regret this!" After assaulting her, he demanded to know where she kept her valuables. He rummaged through her closet, grabbed what he could, and then ordered her to get up and walk outside. As they moved, he covered her head with a pillowcase. In the backyard, he forced her to kneel and issued a chilling warning. "Don't move until you hear 2 car honks or I'll end you." Then he left, paralyzed with fear. The mother stayed still until a familiar voice broke the silence. It was her ex-husband. Overwhelmed with relief, she told him what had happened, and they immediately called the police. When the police arrived, they had no idea who this intruder was, but after further investigation, the police found out that it was the ex-husband himself. He set this attack up to try to win the woman's love back.
In 2008, Johnny Altinger believed he was about to meet a woman he had recently connected with on a dating site. When he arrived, the door creaked open as if someone had been waiting for him. His eyes adjusted to the darkness, landing on something unsettling, a workbench covered in plastic wrap, with a set of knives neatly arranged beside it. Before he could react, a masked figure emerged from the shadows. Without warning, the stranger lunged at him, striking with brutal force. Johnny fought back, but the attacker was relentless. Blow after blow landed until Johnny collapsed, his life stolen in a matter of moments. The killer wasted no time. He lifted Johnny's body onto the workbench and methodically dismembered him, stuffing the remains into garbage bags before disposing of them in a nearby storm sewer. But he didn't stop there. To avoid suspicion, he broke into Johnny's home, accessed his email, and sent messages to his friends and family. It was meant to put any worries to rest, but not everyone was convinced. One of Johnny's close friends read the message and immediately knew something was wrong. The wording, the tone, none of it sounded like him. Suspicious, he contacted the police, setting off an investigation that would soon expose a horrifying truth. Mark Twitchell, an aspiring filmmaker with a dark obsession. Mark had fantasized about becoming a real-life serial killer, inspired by his favorite TV show Dexter. But his attempt at the perfect crime had been riddled with mistakes, and now the police had everything they needed to arrest him.
Throughout the course of their investigation, the police questioned many persons of interest. Among these, a list of 4 prominent suspects that all seem like they could be the killer in one way or another. They are Richard Gaikowski, Arthur Lee Allen, Richard Rick Marshall, and Lawrence Kane.
Arthur Lee Allen died not too long ago. I think he was one of the more prominent suspects.
Arthur Lee Allen had several interesting circumstances that made him a possible lead. For one, he was reportedly given a Zodiac watch for Christmas in 1967. He wore this up until it was seized during a search warrant carried out in 1991. It's possible this is where he got the name the Zodiac. The logo of the watch is a cross symbol, similar to the Zodiac killer's symbol. After receiving the watch, Allen made several comments to a friend about a book he wanted to write that would play out his fantasies. It involved a killer named the Zodiac, who killed couples at random and taunted police. He was also said to be fascinated with the idea of hunting people. During a police interview in 1971, he referenced the novel The Most Dangerous Game, which was also referenced in one of the Zodiac's letters. The Zodiac left a size 10.5 footprint on the scene. Allen also had a size 10.5 foot, according to a police report. And in 1974, he was arrested and committed to a mental institution after being charged for molesting a child. After his arrest, no further authenticated Zodiac letters were ever received.
He certainly could have been the killer, but there wasn't enough evidence to prove that clearly. I think of all the four, that would probably be the best shot. But when I was pulled in as a consultant on the Unabomber case, on the Unabomber take Kaczynski, the day I was brought in, I was sworn in San Francisco. They said, so we're pretty sure we have the right guy already, but we're going to have you come on anyway just to help us out. But we're 99% sure that we have the right guy. Well, they were 100% wrong. Everything fit except this one little piece. They couldn't make it fit because it wasn't him. But they thought they had the right guy.
In 1977, a young couple was startled awake by a masked intruder shining a flashlight into their faces. The man, armed and coldly methodical, wasted no time. He tied the husband's hands tightly behind his back using shoelaces he had hidden in the house beforehand and stacked plates and cups on the man's back as a crude alarm system, ensuring he couldn't move without alerting him. Then, turning his attention to the wife, he dragged her to another room where he assaulted her. Afterward, he sat silently in the room, making her believe he had left, only to terrify her further when she realized he was still there. The intruder spent hours terrorizing the home, rummaging through drawers, scattering belongings, and stealing valuables. His actions were deliberate, almost theatrical, as though he wanted to leave behind an unforgettable mark. It later became clear that this wasn't a random attack. He had stalked the couple for months, learning their routines and even breaking into their home beforehand to prepare for the night. The couple had no idea they were being watched so closely, but the horror didn't end there. Days later, the wife got a phone call. As she answered it, she heard this chilling message. Before I play the message, I just want to let you know that I'm working on long-form content for YouTube, so don't forget to subscribe, link in bio. This was just one of many attacks by the Golden State Killer, a predator whose crimes haunted California for years. It took 4 decades to uncover his identity. In 2018, Joseph D'Angelo, a former police officer, was arrested and confessed to his horrifying crimes. His capture brought long-awaited justice and some semblance of closure to his many victims.